All right, welcome to episode 63 of the At Bat podcast presented by War Media, where we give you our thoughts on the latest Chicago baseball news as well as take a trip around the league. I am Saul Rodriguez, along with my co host today, Gabriel Wilkins, who, of course, you've seen on shows on War Media like Open Run. How we doing, Gabe? I know we got a lot to talk about. We'll cover a lot of it with the White Sox and their front office moves, the Cubs and their push for the playoffs. But how are you doing yourself? How are you doing?
I'm doing well, man. Just trying to stay warm in a climate that's been hot in the go lately. And it sure as hell been hot on 35th and Shields because Jerry Reinsdorf sent the club up on a Tuesday and didn't even show up to the building. So I got a lot to talk about. And I know we got a lot to talk about as far as the state of affairs pertaining to both teams on the south and north side this week.
Yeah, no, you're right. I think this weather that we're having in Chicago with 100 degrees is it's just um perfectly personifies the situation on the south side, with just how hot they are. I mean, everyone's talking about the White Sox right now. Unfortunately, not for the good reasons, not for good reasons. And it's, of course, the firing of Kenny Williams and Rick Hahn. They shake up their front office with, what some people say has been a long time coming. Other people are shocked. Other people don't know what to think. And there's a lot to go around with that. And there's already, again, we'll get into it. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that, that some of the players have said. There's some stuff that also, people have said, are possibilities for the replacement for Rick Hahn, for example. But we'll get right into it, man. I know you have a lot to say. So what was your first take? I know, and I'll be brief with mine, but mine at first was a little shocked because I didn't expect Jerry. I didn't think Jerry had it in him to shake it up as much as, he did here. Um, from the other side looking in, I think this is a good thing for the White Sox in the long run. I think it's a nice fresh reset. There's obviously not even just this. I mean, because man, there's just so much that has happened this week. Not only on top of this, but there's been talks about moving the White Sox, not only in the city limits, but also around the state, and also to another state. And definitely want to get your take on that, because that would be a travesty in itself. But anyways, what was your initial take when you heard that Kenny Williams and Ray Khan were gone?
Well, I received the news from a friend that gave me a call while I was watching Netflix. I was watching Untold Swamp Kings on the Florida football team. And I sent him a text ignoring him, saying, I'll call you back. And he sends me a text immediately saying Hahn and Williams are fired. So I immediately paused the movie and I looked to verify it on Twitter, which is, the number one source for news these days. Went
Mm-hmm.
directly to the White Sox Twitter page. I saw the announcement. When I saw it, I was like you, I was shocked. And the reason why I was shocked is because I know Jerry Reinsdorf. I grew up around him. My mother was the special assistant to the vice chairman, Eddie Einhorn, for 10 years from 92 to '02. And Kenny Williams came into the organization in 1992, just a few months after my mother did, a year before I was born. And I grew up around Kenny. I knew how Jerry Reinsdorf looked at Kenny. I was more shocked by that firing than the Rick Hahn firing. I could kind of see the writing on the wall for Rick. He had been with the organization for 20 plus years, but the fire, not only Rick Hahn, but Kenny Williams, a guy that Jerry looked at as a son, as a family member, a guy that I grew up around and served as like one of my initial introductions to the game of baseball. And my family looked out for during his days as a scout before he even became a GM, something that we never thought he would be. And kudos to him in his career and what he was able to do, bringing a championship to the South Side in 2005. But this was a move that I feel like should have taken place 8 to 10 years ago. But for many reasons, it never did, because we know Jerry is loyal to his employees, including his front office executives and representatives. Even, you don't have to look too far on the West Side with the Bulls to know that. But man, it was truly a move that was long overdue. And I think it's brought a level of optimism back to the fan base. However, I would advise fans to be cautiously optimistic, because with this move comes another move. And that's the move that will be the most important move to determining just how far the White Sox go in the future.
Yeah, no, yeah, I mean, you said it best right there. I mean, you touched on all of it. I mean, um, this situation, as much as it's good that, they were able to make a move into a positive direction, which direction they're going to go in is still up in the air. And I think a lot of the things that people have been talking about in the negative light is internally. A lot of people think of it, they see with a lot of people have said Jerry has someone in mind. And, with him having somebody in mind this quick, maybe they think it's somebody internal with like a Chris Getz, for example. And we talked about it a little bit off air and just because, you know, uh, I have a lot of questions to a lot of people have when it comes to Chris Getz. Like for example, speaking of major pundits, Ken Rosenthal yesterday, I saw him getting interviewed, and he was saying that um, Chris Getz has done some great work with the Sox, right? But when you really look at it, like stand back and look, there hasn't been major movement when it comes to the minor league system because they're still, as of right now, Baseball America has them at 22, ranked minor league system. So
Yes, they do.
that's yeah. So that's the thing that I had is that nothing against Chris Getz, but I think ultimately they just need to go in a different direction. And you said a little bit when I was asking you about that about why you think that is. So you could say it on here. So go ahead. And what's your thoughts on if they stay internal and if it's Chris Getz?
If it's Chris Getz, and I don't believe it will be him right away because I
Mm-hmm.
believe if he was going to be the GM or named right away, they would have done it on Tuesday night. I think the White Sox are going to do a thorough search in regards to finding out who the next president of baseball operations will be or general manager. But getting back to the Chris Getz is not responsible for all of this. Chris Getz, even though he's one of the top 5 guys in the White Sox front office, and even though he is the guy that is the assistant general manager and was in charge of player development in the minor leagues, it was the Rick Hahn and Kenny Williams show. And as we can see, based off what's been reported, and based off of even what I've heard through the grapevine, I'm not trying to act like I'm in Ken Rosenthal's shoes, but I know people that's still part of the White Sox organization. There was a lot of dysfunction between Rick Hahn and Kenny Williams. And I'm going to tell you where that stems from. Rick Hahn started out as an assistant GM under Kenny. And then years later, following the 05 World Series title run, several years later, he stepped into a higher position while Rick Hahn stepped into his position. But technically, Rick Hahn was the number one, and Kenny, due to falling in the background and fading to black, was playing the number 2 role. But ego plays a part in some things falling apart. And I think with not only Rick, but Kenny, there was a clash of 2 guys. And that's why things were up and down. But getting back to Chris Getz, I mean, he's not responsible for all of this. And Chris Getz is someone who has brought some innovative ideas, at least, to the farm system, such as Project Birmingham, where you saw last year the White Sox top prospects all coming together and playing under the same roof and developing alongside of each other. But I don't think Chris Getz is just like the de facto guy right now. Yes, he's running an organization right now next to Jeremy Haber, who's the assistant GM. But Chris Getz has shown some care of the minor league system to a level in which you could say Rick Hahn or Kenny Williams didn't do enough several years prior to Chris Getz getting here in 2017.
Yeah, and I think yeah, you're right on that. It's definitely not on all that. It's definitely the Rick Hahn show, and what was that with Kenny Williams and all that. So, yeah, I just think for my end, I think I like the names I'm hearing already. And you mentioned one the other day, I saw you on Twitter mentioned Luna, Jeff Luna, and I think that's also a good name, and I want to ask you about that as well. But also, I've heard a lot about Dayton Moore, the former Royals GM as well as some people, this one might be a little bit more of a stretch. But Theo Epstein has still, is still out there as much as he wants to get that, that president of baseball, get in that Manfred spot eventually. who knows? But as of right now, I think those are some of the names that I've heard. But outside of that, outside of the Chris Getz and the internal, what's a guy who's a guy you're eyeing? Is it one? Is it Lunau or is it maybe a Dayton Moore? Anybody in particular that you see that's available on the board to take as the next GM for the White Sox?
I'm looking at this like I'm in Jerry Reinsdorf's shoes, to tell you the truth, Saul. I want them to interview at least 20 plus candidates. And I want them to stretch this out as long as they possibly can. If it takes them waiting into the ALCS or the top of the World Series to announce who the president of baseball operations is and the GM, I'm cool with that. My primary target, though, at this time would be Mike Rizzo. Mike Rizzo is a guy that I know very well. My mother had the privilege of working with alongside of in the White Sox organization. He started out as a scout. He was the scout that signed off on the selection of Frank Thomas back in 1990 out of Auburn when he was a top 5 pick in the draft. And he has ties to this area, but it's a thing that a lot of fans aren't paying attention to. Davey Martinez just signed a 2-year deal extension to remain as the manager of the Washington Nationals. Mike Rizzo is on the final year of his deal, and they are said to be working on an extension. However, he has not signed that extension yet. And with him having ties to this area, with his father, Phil Rizzo, working as a scout under Jerry Reinsdorf, and Reinsdorf being a guy who has spoken highly of the late Phil Rizzo, as well as Mike Rizzo, still has a relationship with him. That's a guy that I would keep my eye on, because since he's left the White Sox organization, he's worked in multiple organizations and he's been successful. He was the scout for the Arizona Diamondbacks when they won the World Series in 2001. He brought players into that organization, such as a Max Scherzer, and when he went to the Washington Nationals, he drafted Steven Strasburg, #1 overall, just retired prior to us recording this podcast on Thursday evening. Bryce Harper, traded for Trey Turner, beat the White Sox in the international pool market to sign Juan Soto. So this guy is proven. And if you're looking for a guy that is proven, who has been there, done that, a guy that has some kin to the White Sox organization, having started out here and transformed his resume into being a successful executive in this league, that would be a guy that I'm targeting. I would also target James Click from Toronto, David Stearns, Brandon Gomes of the Dodgers, John Daniels, who's a senior advisor at Tampa Bay, won back-to-back pennants in Texas, Brian Sabian. The list goes on and on. Dan Duquette, a guy that doesn't get enough credit for building the infrastructure that paved the way for Theo Epstein to win a World Series in 2004 with the Boston Red Sox. It's so many names that you can go after. I just hope that Jerry has the right people in the circle that are giving him solid baseball advice, that have been around the game besides just Tony La Russa and some young blood, and that let him know, look, you got a good opportunity here. Let's get it right.
Yeah, no, yeah, you mentioned some good ones there, and you're right. They definitely should do their homework and have it be a long process because it's worth it. I think for me, if I had to just off the top, I mean, I don't think I look at it from as a large perspective as you do. I mean, you said it as good as it gets, honestly. But me, I think just looking at from the distance, Dayton Moore would be a nice one off the bat, just because he knows the division. He knows the White Sox. He knows, all these teams in the Central. Despite, who knows what direction Major League Baseball is going to go with divisions and all that stuff. But I think it plays a little bit of a part if it's in the short term, if it's a guy that they want for a few years. I don't know what their plan is, but if it's a guy they just want for a few years to kind of take off and then see what happens, who knows? Give him a trial run, I guess. I think that would be a nice guy to have in there. But you bring up some good names, guys that have plenty of experience, especially from teams that are on the rise. So yeah, no, I think it's going to be a real fascinating, look at all these guys that the White Sox could have. But one other thing too I wanted to talk about is, on top of what was been going on with the front office moves, is Tony La Russa. You mentioned him. Tony La Russa has been brought in as a consultant. Do you think that's what was the thing? What do you think is behind the thinking of bringing in Tony La Russa once again?
Well, that's Jerry's best friend.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been proven that Tony La Russa is not a consultant, or he has no direct role with the White Sox, like in name, or he's not on the payroll. But Tony La Russa is always going to be around. as long as Jerry Reinsdorf owns this ball club. They've always been great friends, even dating back to the time in which Hawk Harrelson, when he was the GM of the team before he became the primary play-by-play announcer for over 30 plus seasons, like they've always been tight. When I was a little kid, sometimes I used to see Tony around the ballpark, during off season or whatever. So I know that that's going to be a guy that's always in the mix, but I want to see other guys as well. But I'm not making too much of the Bob Nightingale report, and I will tell you why. Because I personally believe if Chris Getz was going to be the overwhelming favorite to get the White Sox general manager job, Jerry Reinsdorf would have announced that shit first thing on Tuesday night. Let's just call it for what it is. This is a thorough search. And Jerry Reinsdorf is 87 years old. He is on the back nine of his life. He's on borrowed time. He also has not hidden the fact that he may be open to selling this ball club. If he's going to sell it, knowing Jerry like I know Jerry, he's going to have to leave the ball club not only in a better position than he found it in, but he's going to seek the cash out. Meaning when he sells it, he's going to sell it for billions of dollars. If he's going to sell for a big payday, he has to leave this ball club in a great position to not only win in the immediate future, but to win or potentially, have a solid core for the next decade.
Yeah. And that's true. I mean, the way it's looking like, there's been, murmurs that he wants to sell and all that, as you said. Who knows, the truth of those things. But that's one of the things, too, I wanted to talk to you about as well, because, besides all of this before, the moves happened with Rick Hahn and Kenny Williams, there has been rumors now that the White Sox are considering a move, whether it be around to a different part of the state or even to like out of state. Like, may they consider, Nashville or whatever, which, like I said before, would be a travesty to lose that second baseball team here in Chicago. And I also don't think that would make any sense because of the way that Manfred has been talking about expansion, not relocation, as much as the Rays talk and the A's talk as those have been the main ones. But yeah, what were your thoughts when you heard about that stuff? Obviously, the one that makes more sense, or the one that seems more credible, if anything, is the one to move around, around the city limits. But what are your thoughts on the relocation stuff?
You know me, Saul. I'm a businessman. I love business. And I love sports and economics, and I value capitalism as much as I may not always care for Jerry Reinsdorf's business practices. I don't see Jerry Reinsdorf or even the next owner of the White Sox moving this team outside of Chicago. This is a flagship American League franchise that has been in operation since 1900 or 1901. This is the third largest media market. To leave this market, even if you are the second team in the second city, for the 27th largest media market in Nashville, although the city is growing exponentially on an annual basis, that would be fucking crazy. He's using that as a leverage play to try and get a stadium, and a stadium that's funded by taxpayers, which I don't believe he's going to do. However, I do believe this is a way for him to begin the process of negotiating for a new home for the White Sox, in which the team owns. That way, should he seek to sell, he's giving the new owner not only a ball club, but a ballpark in which he or she owns, and a ballpark in which they could build a village around and have events, not just on game day, but 365 days a year if they want to, excluding holidays and whatnot. So when I look at this is a business play. And there are many, things that they can seek to do. They can seek to build on the site of the old Comiskey and turn Guaranteed Rate Field into a ballpark village. And I wouldn't be against that, because if they moved it across the street, you would get a beautiful view of the city skyline. And maybe you could do it the right way, as opposed to how you did it back in the day when the state came in at the 25th hour. Jim Thompson, rest in peace, the former governor of Illinois, and saved the day. but the taxpayer funded stadium stuff that he's pushing for is not gonna happen. It's a leverage play. And I don't know if you know this, but prior to us ever coming into existence, Jerry Reinsdorf pulled this shit back in like the late 80s, where he threatened to move the White Sox to Tampa. And how did that work for him? And he even admitted to you later on in the mid 90s that he was using it as a leverage play and that he never had intention to leave Chicago. And I'm gonna tell you, if he ever pulled that, he risked putting the business that he has here in the Chicago Bulls in jeopardy. Because you tell me, do you think a lot of Chicago sports fans will support the Bulls in a high number, or that United Center attendance will be in record numbers when the Bulls are playing if he was to move this team out of Chicago or sell to somebody who did and knew that they had those intentions? I don't think so.
No, yeah, hey, that you make some good points there, and the fact that it's a ploy. It reminds me a lot of the Bear stuff, right? With like their oh,
And
Waukegan
that's what
wants
ignites
them.
it.
Yeah, yeah, and it's like Waukegan wants them, Springfield wants them, but really it's just the Bears want to keep this going because they want what they want in Arlington. They want to keep their chips where they're at. So yeah, that's some good points because it would make, like I said before, it would make no sense to move this team out of this state. Not only from a perspective of business, but just for fans in general. Like if you're a Cubs fan and you're celebrating because I saw some fans on Twitter like, oh, you get the Sox out of here. Like, you're lying. There's no way in hell that you want to lose this team on the South Side. Like, the rivalry is great, as it always is. Not only that, but you have another place to go see baseball games. Like, we talk about this all the time.
When your team ain't in town.
Exactly. And we talk about this all the time. You see me at plenty of Sox games because at the end of the day, more expensive ticket is Wrigley, and it's just more of a hassle to get to. As much as I love my Cubs, I'm okay with going to 1 to 2 games a year. It's fine because the way you spend your money there is wild. And going to White Sox games, I love going to White Sox games because you get to see other teams that come in that don't come in as much as at Wrigley, even with this whole different schedule. So yeah, there's just no way that it would, benefit like more than it would hurt than moving out of the state. Moving around to a different part of the city would be interesting to me because where would they go? As you said, close to that location where they're at now. I understand that makes more sense. But other places, I mean, I know this is just like people have talked about it more of meatball takes than anything, but people have said, hey, what about when if the Bears move from Soldier Field, what about taking or making a stadium like around that area, whatever? That I find truly interesting, as much as it's probably just a bunch of BS, but it
I
would
got
be
another one
interesting.
for you.
Yeah, go ahead.
You heard of the new 78 neighborhood that the city of Chicago is working on, and
Oh
they tried to
yeah.
propose building a Bally's casino there, but it didn't go through because they decided to put the new Bally's casino that they're working on in River North, where the old Chicago Tribune offices were or are now, but they're about to tear down. They could build a stadium in the 78. They're gonna build a red line stop in the next several years off of 15 and Clark. I would love to see the White Sox still be on the South Side, but in the South Loop. That wouldn't bother me. You only go on a couple stops further. You still have the South Side pride and the identity that's a part of the ball club. And at some point, all great things must come to an end. But Bridgeport will always be a part of the White Sox, and the South Side will always be a part of the White Sox. I don't see this ball club leaving the city. I don't see this ball club leaving Chicago or the state of Illinois, period. And I find it so interesting how, in spite of the White Sox being a doormat right now in the American League, even though they in the press for negative reasons, they're the talk of the town. Meanwhile, the Cubs are fighting for a playoff spot. And if I didn't know anything about baseball, I wouldn't know it, because everything I see right now is about the black and white. I'm just saying.
Yeah, no, you're right. And I think, that's another thing too, that when it came to moving, I was like, man, the South Side thing with the White Sox, it just fits so perfectly with them. And I feel like if they moved anywhere else, it would just be, as much as you say, it would always be part of them, but still, like, you just like, you like the North Side versus South Side type thing. And definitely I don't see them also leaving either. So Hopefully everything moves in the right direction sooner rather than later. Even if you say, as you said, probably should take as much time as they, want. Hell, even if they pass the World Series, man, it'd still be a good thing as long as they do their thorough search of a general manager, and all that. So hopefully things work out. As we're moving on, there's plenty of stuff to talk about with Chicago baseball because, of course, the north side, like you said, is pushing for a playoff spot, man. But, as they sit, 66 and 60, they're currently holding the second spot. They're tied, I should say, the second spot in the wild card in the National League. And they're still in second place in the National League Central, 3.5 games back of the Brewers, who don't seem to lose. This Cubs team, I mean, I feel like they're having some close calls against some teams that are under 500. I mean, as we're recording this today on a Thursday, they're playing the Pirates, tied 3-3 in the seventh. So, it looks like they're playing down, but I know that some of these teams, like they just played the Tigers 1-2 out of 3, the Royals 2 out of 3. Man, those two teams gave the Cubs everything they had, and I think especially I was more concerned that a team like the Royals, as easy it is to say, would be easier sweep. The Tigers, of course, have been playing good ball. They have guys that are mashing, and they mashed against the Cubs. Kerry Carpenter,
Mm-hmm.
the second coming of Barry Bonds out there smashing balls. I'm just like, dude, why? Like in like the first at bat, I'm like, this is Kerry Carpenter. All right, whatever. And then like just I saw him like by the third game, I was like, oh no, here comes Kerry Carpenter. Like this is ridiculous. And Spencer Torkelson's also raking. So it's cool to see the young guns in Detroit, but just not against your team. And it was one of those things that was pretty frustrating in the loss, even though they won the series. That you're just like, man, like the Cubs just, it's a starting pitching is the main problem. And I think that's one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about and just your thoughts overall on the starting rotation, because we've said it and we've mentioned it, the fact that the Cubs starting pitching is one of their weaknesses as of right now, especially with the lack of stars in their rotation, like, Stroman, who's out, and a guy like, Drew Smiley, who's struggling, like just immensely struggling. And he's, being thrown out there, again against the Tigers, and the Cubs lose that game. It's rough, especially when you're looking at a team that's trying to fight for any type of postseason spot, whether it be wild card or the Central. But yeah, just looking at the rotation right now, we've said it before, and we mentioned Jordan Wicks, who got scratched on Tuesday. And they have yet to announce who's going to start on Sunday in Smiley's spot, because they're not going to allow him to start again. He's going to go move to the bullpen. So that's good. That's positive. Who's going to start on Sunday? Nobody knows because they haven't mentioned it. But I imagine it's going to be a top, like one of the top prospects for the Cubs. Whether it's Wicks or not, I imagine it's going to be Wicks. But that's a great move for the Cubs if that is to happen. I know they brought up Keegan Thompson for some bullpen help. Keegan Thompson, he had a good season in 2021. He looked pretty good, and we thought it was going to be a solid bullpen piece. Didn't really look like that in a lot of 2022 and the start of this season as well. So I'm not sure about that move, but with September coming, plenty of options to pick from, as we mentioned before. But I want to get your thoughts on the Cubs rotation as it looks right now, because honestly, man, you look at the Brewers rotation, it just looks as good as ever. You look at the Reds rotation, it's only getting better with guys like Williamson and guys like um,
Hunter Green.
Hunter Green. I was going to say Harrison Green,
I
Hunter
got you.
Green. So yeah, it's those guys. They're only getting better, and they're getting guys back. So yeah, what are your thoughts on the Cubs rotation and how much is going to affect them if they don't? Let's say, looking at it right now, obviously it's easier to say that it's a little shaky come September. But if they do add a guy like Wicks, I'm sure it changes things up if he pitches as they expect them. Obviously, that's a big if. But what are your thoughts so far on the Cubs rotation as we sit here on August 24th?
I mean, with the Cubs rotation, it's plain and simple to me. Your top half is gonna give you a chance. You
Mm-hmm.
got a guy like Justin Steele, you can ride him to the wheels fall off. That's a guy that's gonna be in the running for the NL Cy Young Award, and he's done a hell of a job most of the time in which he's going to the bump every 5 days or so. It's gonna come down to the back half, and I
Mm-hmm.
think Jordan Wicks will be the guy that the Cubs look to as their primary southpaw in their starting rotation down the stretch. I mean, we're talking about a guy with a 3.82 ERA through 7 starts this year at the Cubs AAA affiliate in Iowa since being promoted from AA Tennessee. He went 4 2/3 in his last outing, struck out 7 hitters, only allowed just 2 runs. He hasn't allowed any more than 3 earned runs in any start I think, since he's gotten called up to Iowa, which is a positive. He has, a variety of pitches, as we alluded to a week ago, talking about, potential arms that the Cubs may look to call up. And to me, he's their most MLB ready arm down on the farm right now. So with that said, I think they got to look at him, especially when you consider the way that Smiley got tagged in the Motor City in game 2 of that 3-game set that they had with the Tigers. A Tigers team that, as you talked about, has been playing some great ball, and AJ Hinch has those young guys believing. So when I look at their pitching, I have some concerns about the back end a little bit, but this is a good experience for this group. And me and you both know that this is really just the beginning for the Cubs, and they're playing with house money this year. Those arms that we've discussed, such as the Ben Browns and Kay Hortons of the world, they coming.
Yeah, no, you're right. We mentioned those guys, and I think that it's one of those things where they kind of have a lot to choose from there, and also I feel like whoever you choose, they have a great opportunity to not only make an impact now, but also in October if it happens for them.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I'm on the same boat as you though. That I think it is going to be Wicks that they call on, and all signs point to it. Obviously, they're not going to tell us just yet, but as well as a guy like PCA to come and help them as well, because Talkman's he's cooled off a little bit since that little run he had at the early start of August and late July at the leadoff spot. As much as they've had success with him leading off, I think Pico Armstrong can come up and lead off for this team, tomorrow. So we'll see what happens there. There's a lot to be played for, and I think a lot of these games, man, it's going to be intense. And I will say before we move on to as well to other subjects, that next series against the Brewers, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday at Wrigley, is as big as it gets. And when you look at some of these pitching matchups as well, just game 2 says it all. Game 2 is the headliner with Steele and Burns. That's the game that I think everybody's gonna be watching that one. So it's definitely gonna be as blockbuster as you can get for an NL Central matchup. But your thoughts on that series and just what's going to come, because they're facing the Pirates right now. Obviously, got to take care of that first. And this is a team that they're 6-0 against. So really hope the Cubs are able to at least win 3 from that series. But yeah, looking ahead to that Cubs Brewers series, what do you see happening there? Because they're all even, they even have that Wednesday game, the 120, a finale will have Hendricks and Woodruff. So, which a matchup we've seen plenty of times. So definitely going to be some interesting matchups there. But what are your thoughts on that series and what we should expect?
Well, I've seen Milwaukee up close in person. They came to the South Side, swept the White Sox for the first time since 1986 a couple weeks ago. And that's a team that you do not want to be behind in the 7th inning or later, because when they got arms that they can throw at you, like an Abner Uribe, Devin Williams, a guy that I regard as one of the best closers in the business, you can pretty much say good morning, good afternoon, and good night with those guys. I think it's gonna come down to hitters' approach, and these games are gonna be key. You talk about just the 3-game series with Milwaukee, man. You following that up with 4 on the road in Cincinnati on Labor Day weekend. So you got 7. Your next 11 games are against NL Central opponents. This is the time for the Cubs to put the foot on the gas pedal and see how much ground they can make up in the Central. They only 3.5 out right now in the Central, and they're in the thick of the wild card hunt alongside of the Reds. I believe they're both 2 and 3rd respectively in the wild card standings. Like, man, these are some pressure packed games. I'm just curious to see how the young guys fare in these games. Last year in September, they played the role of spoiler a little bit. They got some big wins against Philly before they went on their run and whatnot. Now you actually playing for something. I'm curious to see how the players that are a part of the lineup on a daily basis, such as a Chris Morel, a Nick Madrigal, even a Heimer Candelario, how does he play in this situation? Because prior to this, he was in Washington and he was in Detroit. Wasn't really playing for nothing. You want to cash out? this offseason, these are the games you got to step up, show out, and deliver in.
You're right. And I think, he's been playing, hitting 300 plus. I think it was like 360 something or whatever that he's been hitting with the Cubs. So he's playing good, but you're right. This is his first real taste of the postseason like play. Because of course, people keep calling him like, oh, the World Series champion in 2016, but he barely played in any games, let alone played any games in September, and of course of October. So this is real taste of some, some high intensity baseball. And I think, yeah, you're right. It's going to be really interesting to see where these guys land, and also just how these guys play in general. Nick Madigat has been playing way better. He's hitting well. Suzuki is one of the top sluggers in August when it comes to slugging percentage, which is crazy. So yeah, we'll see where things go, but I think the Cubs really have a good chance. I think that's the best thing you could expect, as you said, playing with house money. That's the best part. I think even if they don't make the playoffs, I don't think I'd be by any means disappointed. I think they had their shot, and I think they're sending a message across to the league that they want to compete again, and they're going to be out there looking for, somebody to sign in the offseason, whether it's Ohtani, whether it's, re-signing Bellinger, whatever it is. So we'll see what happens, but I think that, these next series in the next week are going to be just insane. And we'll get into that Red Series next week because, of course, running short on time. But that series against the Brewers, of course, will happen before we record again. And that's gonna be blockbuster, man. I can't wait for that one. A couple of things before we go, didn't want to mention. Of course, the Wander Franco situation is still, all that stuff is still coming out. Nothing's for sure. But they, there's been some murmurs from, the Dominican Republic. There's talking about how he probably won't play again. Obviously it's not official, but that's just what they've been talking about for people close with their ear close to the DR. The Rays have slowly but surely just been disappearing just about all of Wander Franco's stuff from a Tropicana field, whether it's posters, whether it's bobbleheads, all that stuff from around the stadium. So that's the latest. I mean, there's really not a giant amount. It's just what people expect. As a lot of the league is investigating, so is the DR and all that. So as much as we know is out there, and that's where we'll leave it for now. But other in unfortunate news related to baseball, we got on Wednesday. It broke that Shohei Ohtani has a UCL tear, and he won't pitch again for the rest of the season, and probably going to miss the rest of 2024. That is just as depressing as news as a baseball fan could get, because despite him still being able to hit, the one of the main reasons Ohtani is one of the best athletes in the world is because he does both, and unfortunately we won't be able to see that for a while. On top of that, the Angels have been playing terrible baseball, just got swept by the Reds. And Mike Trout, who recently just came back, is back on the IL, just to make matters worse for the Angels. So it's as bad as it gets. And we really wanted them to make the playoffs. We talked about it earlier in the season, as good as that would be for baseball, but it's just another another season that's as disappointing as it gets for the Angels. But man, what are your thoughts on the Ohtani situation? Because I know that any fan that's a fan of baseball, man, I'm sure took it really hard when they heard this situation.
My initial thought, he just lost hundreds of millions.
Yep.
This winter. Shohei Ohtani was on the verge of being able to break the bank. And now I think he's going to have to take a deal where he's going to have to sign like a 2-year deal or so with a team. But before he actually does that and cashes in on a short-term deal, he needs to ask himself, what do I see myself as long-term? Do I want to be a full-time hitter or designated hitter type guy, part-time outfield type, or do I want to be both a hitter as well as a elite level ace on a starting rotation? If that's the case, he needs to sign a short-term deal where he rehabs with the team that's the best when it comes to making sure guys are right. Because if he goes under the knife for Tommy John, this will be his second Tommy John surgery. And that's nothing to play with. But with a guy who is as uber talented as he is. So I feel very sorry for him, but I hope he takes a risk and is willing to gamble on himself, because I believe if he can get with the best of doctors, which I know he will, and get under the knife and sit out the first season of that deal and come back year two and be able to do both, he's going to put himself in a position to cash out again like he should have been able to this winter.
Yeah, I agree. That's the one thing that me and a couple of buddies are talking about with the money part of things is that, yeah, this changes the Ohtani sweepstakes, as a whole coming up in the fall and, after the World Series and all that. So where he goes really is anyone's guess. And I think this opens it up. This really opens it up for just about anybody, right? Because I think everyone was thinking, hey, he could go to the Dodgers. Hey, the Padres, whatever it is. But now I think he could go anywhere. And I think
Yes, he
he
can.
could. And the thing about that is that I know he wants to win, but even then, it would just be fun seeing him in a smaller market. Whether and when it comes to good teams, like, hey, I wouldn't want, obviously as a Cubs fan, you don't want this to happen, but say like he goes to like a Reds or say he goes to a Brewers. And that for baseball, unfortunately, that would be fun, right? Because
You
it would
won't have
just
to
be.
worry about that one. I don't think so.
Hey, I'm
If
just saying.
anything, it might have helped. It might have helped them Northsiders out.
Yeah, yeah, no,
It
it
may
does, it
have.
does. Mhm. And you're right on that. But I'm just saying in the sense of like maybe if he does a 2 to 3 years thing and he takes like a lower amount of money, then those teams are probably willing to to take out the checkbook. But yeah, regardless, it does help the Cubs, and I think in the sense of also because I think it's good that he's going to be available to hit, and he's just as good as you can tell. I mean, these past few games, apparently, you could tell he was in some kind of pain, and he was still lighting up the game. So, yeah, we'll see what it does overall. But I think it is sad that he won't be able to pitch because it was so fun to see him do that and get on the mound. So, regardless, I'll take him. You're right. If this helps the Cubs, I'll take him, of course, because we need that type of bat. So yeah, we'll see what happens. We got plenty of time to figure out and guess where this man's gonna go. So the last thing I did want to touch on is kind of give a little bit of a tip of the cap to Steven Strasburg, who called it a career
Absolutely.
today here on Thursday. It's a guy that won the World Series. He's a guy that won a World Series MVP, and yet to many people, as just myself, but overall reaction is what could have been. He could have played way more, could have won way more accolades. And he's calling it a career at 35. Unfortunately, he just injury bug could not get over the injury bug since he got into the league. Unfortunately, but well, I think there's no bigger. I think yeah, you can make an argument. There's no bigger debut in the history of the game for a rookie than Steven Strasburg. And how many strikeouts did he get? Was it 14?
I don't know, but it was
It was
definitely
against the
over 10.
Pirates.
It was against the
Yeah, yeah,
Pirates.
yeah. It's
It
against
was
the
over
Pirates.
10. A lot of people been putting the highlights up on Twitter, and I gotta go and watch it. Somebody actually put up the full game of it on Twitter. And I would love to just go back and watch that. But he was one of the first big time prize prospects that I can recall watching coming up as a teenager. And I remember them talking about him in San Diego State being coached under the late Tony Gwynn, who was also a Hall of Famer. And you knew the velocity was next level. But the question is whether or not he'd be able to hold up. He's a guy that, in spite of that, had a great career. And you can honestly say he pretty much sacrificed his arm to help the Nationals win their first World Series championship. Because ever since then, he was only able to make 8 starts over a 3-year period. But kudos to Steven Strasburg. Had a successful career nonetheless. Provided fans in the nation's capital, as well as all baseball fans, with some stellar moments and memories. But we always find ourselves wondering just what if and what would his career might have been if he was just able to stay healthy.
Yeah, and yeah, I got it. It was 14 strikeouts for Strasburg in his debut in 2010. Against the Pirates. But you're right, man. It definitely he did accomplish a lot, but it's one of those things where you just who knows where he could have been in just in the conversation for best pitcher of all time because I feel like the talent was there to be that. So we'll see what happens with other guys that have had these injury bugs that because a lot of people say, hey, a guy like this, it could easily be DeGrom, right? Because of the injury bug and how bad it's been for a guy like that. We hope it's not, but man, a lot of these guys they go too soon and unfortunate. And but we wish the best of luck to Strasburg and his future endeavors for sure. But I think it's a good place to wrap things up for this week's at bat. Wish we had more time to talk about all the things going on in Chicago because there's plenty. But of course, hopefully everyone looks at the rest of our content on War Media. There's plenty of stuff there to watch. They got the Bears Den that's going to be released tomorrow. Me and Joe Tanks are going to be talking all things Bears preseason, injuries, all that stuff, as well as Slam Society with Will Resendez and Josh Wright. We're talking all things UFC 292 and preview WWE Payback. We also, me and Anthony Pisana, who has contributed with plenty of movie reviews and all that. We got to interview Zach Arnold, who's a producer of Cobra Kai, and talked all things actors and writers strike. So that'll be streaming on Monday on all platforms. So definitely check that out. I want to thank my co-host Gabriel Wilkins. Miles Porter will be back next week. I want to thank everyone for watching. For Saul Rodriguez, everyone have a great week.